Today we're going to do a boot camp. There's a gazillion million things we can do with compression. We can sidechain, we can multiband sidechain, we can do upward compression, downward compression, we can do a million things. But today we're going to talk about the basics. And I know we have gurus, we have intermediate people, we have advanced people and some beginners. You can never boot camp enough. Really, the basics, the fundamentals, it's critical. And it's critical to revisit them many, many times in your career. And I'm going to call this your career, your music career. As audio production, you need to revisit the basics. It's very cleansing. And you can catch something that you've had wrong. You can always fill in a couple little blanks. And I find that for myself, every time I teach a boot camp, it just kind of it tones you up, it tunes you up, it freshens you up, and you catch a couple new things. Okay, so why do we compress? Why do we care? Why do we compress? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we compress, but the bottom line is for power. We compress to get power in our music. And at the school, we're always talking about the difference between loudness and power. Some things are loud, but they're not powerful. Some things are powerful, but not loud. But compression compacts the energy. It concentrates the energy. For those who cook, it's like concentrating a broth or concentrating a sauce. You cook off the water content and you get more concentrated flavor. And when we do compression, boot camp of compression, we're talking today about downward compression because there's upward compression too. We're not going to deal with that today. We're going to deal with downward compression. What is downward compression? Downward compression means that the input signal is rising up and crossing the threshold, and the compressor turns it down, right? Yes, Apple Watch is for everyone. Absolutely. So the input signal is rising above the threshold and the compressor turns it down. Well, when we deal with humans and people who are recording, singing, that kind of thing, we want to level out their performance, right? Sometimes people get too quiet or too loud, and you would find yourself at home on your home stereo wanting to have your finger on the volume, turn it up and down. If it was too quiet, you turn it up. And if it's too loud, you turn it down. Well, that's no way to live, as we say, right? You want to sit back with your club soda and have the music come at you and not have to turn it up and down, right? So compression on a vocal, for example, or a guitar or a bass or a conga, it levels things out. It decreases the distance between the quietest part of the signal and the loudest part of the signal. So that's one of the things we use with compression, which is just to compact a human performance so that a single listening level would reveal the entire performance and you wouldn't have things be too loud or too quiet. Fine. Now, how about with modern electronic music, EDM music? Why would we compress a kick drum that had a fixed volume, that had no dynamic range? Well, in this case, we're actually using a compressor as an envelope tool, right? It changes the attack and the release and the sustain, and it changes the shape of the sound. That's one reason. Another reason is sometimes a compressor is a saturator in disguise, right? So this takes us to the way we talk about compression at our school, which is that there's sort of two branches of the tree of compression. One is what we call musical compression, and one is what we call technical compression. And we're just going to deal with single band compression today. Multi-band compression, multi-band dynamics, we'll do another time. So in single band compression, basically you want to make sure that you are thinking about whether you want to saturate the signal or whether you want clean control. And so musical compressors are vintage compressors with a degree of saturation, harmonic saturation. Technical compressors are a bit different. So let's first look at a musical compressor. Can everybody see and hear? So here is a analog modeled sort of British compressor. It's not really a specific model of any type. It's sort of a Frankenstein I think it's a Chandler. Maybe it's a little Neve-esque. It's sort of a British console compressor. And we have a threshold, a ratio, attack, release, makeup gain that's manual, not auto makeup gain, and a wet dry mix. And then down below we have another saturation option, transformer in or transformer out. And then we have another saturation option between circuit 1 and circuit 2. Circuit 1 has a little bit of a quicker release. Circuit 2 has a longer sustain. Now, in musical compressors, we use them as saturators. What is saturation? It adds intervals, musical intervals relative to the fundamental, even and odd ordered harmonics that make the signal richer. And somehow magically, when analog distorts, it distorts in the key of the song or relative to the key of the song. Digital does not, right? When digital distorts, it distorts as a function of the sample rate and sounds terrible. It puts in all kinds of bad notes into the chord. When analog distorts, when you overdrive it, it splinters off into octaves and fifths and other intervals that are musically related to the fundamental, which is the lowest tone. So we love saturation because it makes things rich. You know, you look at a black and white movie or black and white pictures of your grandparents. Everyone has perfect skin. You know, it's the saturation of the film that makes for a rich sound. And in digital, we love saturation. So here is our musical compressor that is actually a saturator. So let's just listen to it as a saturator for a second. Okay, so now we're going to think of compressors, everyone who knows me knows this analogy, as like little elves. They're little elves that work for you. And they're waiting with their finger above the fader, just waiting there to help you reshape the dynamics of just that track, right? Whether it's a bus track or a single track. Now, the control that makes them act is the threshold. Anything that's below the threshold, the little elf doesn't do anything. Just hangs out with its finger above the fader. Once this input signal crosses the threshold, the elf knows that it's time to act, right? Now, the amount of time it takes for the elf to get to the fader and start to pull it down is the attack time. So the attack time is really the reaction time of the elf. Now, if the attack time is said to be very, very short, the elf gets there right there to the fader and starts to pull it down. A longer attack time, right, in seconds, it means that it takes the elf longer to get to the fader and to pull it down. If we want something to have more knock and more percussive power, we want a slower or longer attack time. If we want things to be less percussive and we want to flatten out the sound and flatten out the attacks or the transient more, we want a faster, a quicker attack time. Right? Sometimes people have it reversed, the attack time. They're like, I want it to really, really hit hard. I want a fast attack. No, it's the opposite. If you want it to hit hard, you don't want the attack too fast, because if the attack is too fast, it will choke the percussive power. Everyone follow me? So far, so good on the attack? Give me a Y. I'll say it again. It's our boot camp, right? Okay. So a short attack time will mean less percussive power, and a longer attack time will make things more percussive. Okay. Now, So the signal has crossed the threshold. The ELF knows that there's something to do, and depending on the attack time, makes his way or her way or its way to the fader and pulls it down. How far they pull it down is a function of the ratio, right? That's the ratio. And so it's basically the signal still gets to increase, right? If a singer's singing and they hit a loud note, that loud note still gets to be loud, but it's only allowed to be as loud as a fraction of the ratio. A 2-to-1 ratio means you want to go up 2 dB, I'm going to let you go up 1 dB. You still get to go up. A compressor doesn't mean that things are getting quieter than they would. No. I mean, quieter than they would, yes, but not in a negative sense. It means you still get to be loud and expressive, but less than you intended to be as a function of the ratio. If it's a 2-to-1 ratio and the input signal wants to go 4 dB above the threshold, how far does the ratio allow it to go up? Put in the chat. I'll say that again. 2-to-1 ratio. It wants to go 4 dB. Exactly. 2, 2, 2. Fred, Tom, everybody gets this. Okay, good. What if I have a 4-to-1 ratio and the signal wants to go 4 dB above the threshold? How much does it get to go up? 1. Doug's on it. Okay. 1. Okay. Everyone. Anatoli's on it. Okay. Andy gets it. Everyone gets it. Good. If I have a 3-to-1 ratio and the signal wants to go 6 dB above threshold, how much does the compressor let it rise? 2. All right. So in other words, below the ratio, the signal is free to be as dynamically expressive as it wants to be. Above the ratio, it gets reduced as a function of the ratio above the threshold. Yes, yes, yes? Brilliant. Okay. So how far the ELF pulls it down, this little ELF, is according to your ratio setting. Good. How quickly the ELF pulls it down, what is that called? I'll repeat it, Ed, and this is recorded. You know, that's the fun thing about these live trainings. They're recorded. So you can watch them 1,500 times over again on your Apple Watch in the shower. And I'll leave time for questions for the bootcamp. So don't worry. How quickly the ELF's finger pulls down, what's that called? Who wants to guess? It's not the attack. No, don't say that, you guys. Not how fast. No, the attack is the reaction time. It's not the speed of his finger. It's the time it takes from his alarm ringing like, dude, there's something to do, and he starts to pull it down. It could be a she or it too, right? Not gender specific, this ELF. The reaction time of the ELF. Hey, you know, the signal crosses the threshold. It says, ELF, wake up, there's something to do. Okay, hold on, let me get there. How long it takes to get there, attack time. How far it pulls down is the ratio. How quickly the finger, what's it called? Does anyone know? It's the knee. Darren's got it. Darren has got it. It's called the knee. If it pulls it down gently to the ratio value, it's a soft knee. If it goes straight hard right away to the ratio target, it's hard knee. Which one is more transparent, soft knee or hard knee? No, soft, exactly. Soft knee is a little gentler, more transparent, harder to hear. Hard knee is more like limiting. You hear it. Okay, good. Is everyone still in ELF land? Is this making sense? Okay, good. Now, brilliant. The ELFs. I've taught this compression with the ELF analogy for, 10 years now. It sticks in everyone's mind. Good. Think of the ELFs. Love you too, Marco. They love you too. Okay, so now the signal has gone below the threshold and the ELF lets go. How long it takes after the signal goes below the threshold for the ELF to let go? What is that called? The release. Doug's on it. The release. Jose, Andy, Andreas, the release. So is the release also a reaction time? Yes. Brilliant. So the attack and release are reaction times. So the signal drops below the threshold and the ELF is still pulling it down. That's a long release setting. Longer releases make things more compressed. Shorter releases make things less compressed, more percussive. And it usually has more to do with the sustain of the signal, right? So long release times is more what we call glue, and short release times are more bouncy, more percussive. Now we see, you guys, yes, not always more transparent, Andy. No, it depends on the signal. Sometimes a slower release is more transparent. Sometimes a fast release, if the elf lets go too quick and it's a big volume drop, you hear it breathe and it's less transparent. Okay. So now do we see that the attack and the release are opposite in terms of your compression goals? If you want something more compressed, you go for a shorter attack time. And if you want something more compressed, you go for a longer release time. Do you see that? That's one of the things that people get opposite with compression. They think they sort of agree, but they don't agree. If I want to have the sustain of a signal more compressed, I go for a longer release. If I want the percussive attack of a signal more compressed, I go for a shorter attack. Do you get that? That they're a little bit inverse? Okay, this is critical. Now, same thing. So if someone wanted to offer you an Apple Watch, a free Apple Watch, to make the most compressed vocal in music history, would you have a fast attack, a medium attack, or a slow attack? Most compressed, fast attack. And then how about your release? Fast release, medium release, or slow release? This is for an Apple Watch. No pressure. Slow. Everybody's on it. And then a high ratio, right? A high ratio, 10 to 1, 100 to 1. And a low threshold. A low threshold. Threshold, it always brings out the dyslexia in me. High threshold, low threshold. But if you have a low threshold for pain, it means you can't take a lot of pain. So if we have a low threshold for compression, it means that almost everything triggers the compression. Everybody with me so far? Isn't this the best explanation of compression you've ever heard? It's the elves. They're all your friends. Okay, good. You have all these elves working for you, making your sound beautiful and more powerful, right? They're compacting the sound and they're compacting the energy. All right, so with all of that being said, let's look at our musical compressor, our Slate FG401, our British Console Frankenstein compressor, and let's see if we can watch and hear as we do the different parameters how the sound reacts. First, I'm setting it up with no sound, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm guessing. I'm saying I think the sound needs this. And right now we have no gain reduction going, right? That gain reduction meter up top. What is in Elf Talk? It's a simple Apple loop actually, so that you can try this at home. I use those a lot on the live trainings, so you can exactly duplicate what I have. Now, this gain reduction meter in Elf Talk, what is it going to show us? What is it going to show us? The gain reduction. Right. In Elf Talk, what is it going to show us? The finger movement, not the fader movement. It's going to show us his finger pulling the fader down. I'm just kidding. You're right. You're totally right. No. I'm just joking because I can. It's going to show us the fader movement pulled by the elf's finger. When that gain reduction kicks back, it's showing us the elf pull it down and let it go. And we're going to be able to see fast attacks, slow attacks, the ratio, and the threshold, and how everything works from that gain reduction meter. So this is why we love these things. First, again, as a musical compressor, we're listening to no gain reduction. So the little elf is hanging out, but he's not pulling the fader down yet. And we're pushing in the transformers and the circuitry to hear the fatness that just running through a musical compressor creates. Okay, so you'll check this when you watch it later. It's subtle. I don't know if everyone's in a good listening environment, but it fattens up the sound. It thickens the sound a bit. Okay, so now let's start to compress. And let's stop right there for 1 second. Did everyone hear how it got quiet as soon as I started to compress? That's another thing that freaks people out, right? When they start to compress, they're like, oh, okay, well, Danny said compressors make things more powerful. What's going on? I'm compressing more, and it feels like I just made the sound incredibly weak, and it makes people panic, right? Including me. In analog old school compressors, there's no auto makeup gain, right? So as the elf is pulling the fader down and riding the fader down and riding the fader down, we're losing overall level. And so even though we're actually making something more powerful, it feels to the engineer that you're making it weaker. So we have to push the makeup gain, which is down there. And in old analog style compressors, it's manual. Do you know exactly how much makeup gain to push? No. Are there people in the world who are absolutely obsessed with when they go in and out of bypass that it matches the loudness? Yes, I'm not one of those people. Because we're changing the shape and we're saturating the sound. So to sit there for an hour and trying to make them match, it's not apples and apples anymore. It becomes apples and oranges. So just make it sound cool. Try to make it level so that the bypass works, but don't spend more than 8 seconds doing that. Because you're changing the sound, so you could never, after changing something, make it match to the original. It won't work. Okay. So now we'll watch that one more time. Now we've set up a medium fast attack. If you look at the attack, forget about the numbers in milliseconds. Think of this as like these old compressors are like clocks or something. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So we have a medium fast attack, not the fastest. We're one click up. And we have a medium slow release. What is this going to mean for us? It means it's going to have a little bit of percussive power, and that we have a little bit of glue going on. And we have a 4-to-1 ratio, which means if the signal wants to exceed the threshold by 4 dB, it's going to let it go up 1. So it's medium. It's a medium ratio. Light ratios are 2-to-1, 2.5-to-1, 3-to-1. Medium ratios are 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 6-to-1. And high ratios are 8-to-1, 9-to-1, 10-to-1. Okay. So now, in order for us not to freak out as we make the sound more powerful that we're making it weaker, we're going to guess and manually add some makeup gain. But let's watch this one more time. Now, I know there's there's a volume discrepancy, but does everyone hear the fattening of the sound by compacting the energy and the power? Good. And the saturation. Brilliant. That's what I wanted to hear. All right. So now that you kind of have the threshold working, you've sort of guessed on your makeup game, but you don't have to be too crazy about that. Then you can start one parameter at a time adjusting things to fine tune if you want to tighten up the attack transient or let more attack transient through, and if you want to compress the sustain more or let the sustain be more bouncy. And if you do one parameter at a time, you can hear what you're doing. Okay, so this is critical. Now, we said it before, but now we hear it and we see it. The fast attack chokes the percussive power. The slow attack lets the percussive power pound through and actually makes it louder, as you could hear. And the little elf's doing less pulling down because he's not getting there in time or fast enough. Does everyone see the power that comes from a slow attack? One more time. I want this to be crystal clear. Now, you see what I did there? That's how I found my sweet spot for how percussive I wanted it to be. I isolated the attack. I went the extremes. Slower is brighter. Actually, a lot of the time, yes, it is. Because the transients, the bright transients are allowed to live and they don't get pulled down on. So you do sometimes experience them as brighter. Sometimes louder is brighter too. But you saw what I did. I ran the extremes and then I found this like sweet spot to me, right? This is not about my taste. You're not on this live training for my taste. You're on this live training for my technique and my workflow. You love your taste and you should. That's why you want to learn this stuff and learn how to do it yourself because you want to dial in your taste. So where I ended up, that's the world according to me. And I like that. You might end up in a different place. I would imagine you would. All right, let's now do the release. It's going to work the opposite, right? Right? A slow attack, a slow release rather, is going to make it more compressed. A fast release is going to make it less compressed. And it really mostly acts on the sustain. So now I'm tweaking around on that ratio, right? Which is how far the ELF is pulling it down. And we can watch the gain reduction and see, what am I listening for? What am I listening for? Power. I'm listening for a shape. I'm trying to make a shape. That's what we talk about. When we talk about compression, what kind of shape you're working with. And I'm looking for power, right? I'm compacting the energy. If I go too far, I kill the power. But if I get the sweet spot, according to me, I find it. So just to review, what did we do? We listened to the sound and then we guessed. And this is how I want everyone to start to compress. Guess what kind of attack you want. I think I want a fast one. I think I want medium. I think I want slow. Guess your release. Guess and put it in. Guess your ratio. And then pull down on the threshold. If it's an analog style compressor, get some threshold going, get some makeup gate going, and then adjust one parameter at a time. Do the attack, do the release, and then do the ratio. And listen to how that sound responds to those settings. And this is why you can't use compression presets, because this is all your taste by hand. No EQ presets, no compression presets. I will talk about the wet-dry mix, but not on this live training. That's parallel processing. For today, we're going to pretend you can't see that. We're going to just go for straight compression bootcamp today, because that's its own webinar. Okay. Everyone pretty good with this? Is this making sense? Mostly? And we'll show you how to watch this again if you want to watch it again. It's recorded. Okay, sick. So we said we were going to do some Pro C2. So let's do some Pro C2. And Pro C2 is a technical compressor because it has no saturation. It has a musical... oops, that's the wrong video. That's Pro MB. Hold on. Okay, sorry. That's another different training. Okay, here's Pro C2. Okay, now, Pro C2 is a technical compressor. Remember, we said there's musical compressors and there's technical compressors. Musical compressors usually have old, weird, vintage controls and a saturation component to them, right? 4 kinds of saturation: tubes, transformers, tape, and transistors. Those are the big flavors: tubes, transformers, tape, and transistors. And they color the sound. This is not a compressor that has saturation. It doesn't generate harmonics. It can have an elf-like personality, and that's in the style menu. But it doesn't have saturation. That's not what it does. So in our school, in our method, we use both. And we usually put the musical ones in front of the technical ones. We usually fatten up the sound with musical compressors that saturate and just kind of bounce with the music. And then we really focus the compression with technical compressors because we don't want to saturate it anymore. We've already done that. It has enough saturation. Now we just want to create the shape that we're looking for in a transparent way. And Pro C2 is by far the best technical compressor plugin ever made. Really. So we master it at our school in Mixing Foundations, our beginning intermediate mixing course. We study this thing like crazy. So we see some of the usual suspects here: threshold, ratio, attack, and release. This one has auto gain. I love auto gain. Auto gain guesses how much makeup gain you need and adds it back statically to the output. It doesn't change with the program signal. That would be weird. It actually chooses a fixed value like 3 dB or 4 dB and adds it statically to the output no matter if the input signal is changing. So the cool thing about auto makeup gain is that as you start to compress it, You feel the power you're creating in that moment, as opposed to compressing it as we saw with the vintage compressor, and it felt all of a sudden we panicked that we were making it weaker until we added the makeup game. This also has a hold control, which delays the release, which works very good in sidechaining. It also has a wet-dry mix. It has a range control, which actually sets a limit on the amount of gain reduction. You can say, I never want the ELF to pull the fader down below this, and it stops it cold, which is really cool. It has a variable knee, which we did not see on the Slate 401. And it has internal and external sidechain filters and internal and external sidechain inputs, which most vintage compressors don't have, right? Modern compressors do have. And we use those for sidechaining, and we love them. Another thing that you'll see down below is oversampling. Oversampling is the key to HD sound in digital. If plugins don't oversample or upsample, it's not as high resolution. The result isn't as big sounding. What does it mean to oversample or upsample? It takes in the input and its little digital blocks, and it chops them up into tiny little ones temporarily. And it processes the tiny little ones so they move more like liquid. They move more like analog. And then it takes a photograph of that and then builds it back into the big blocks, and you get a much better picture. Sidechain in compression is when a signal comes into the compressor, it splits off. One is going to be the one that's going to be affected by the VCA, which is the voltage controlled amplifier. It's just the ELF turning it up and down. It's the thing that says, ELF, turn it up. ELF, turn it down. It's the turn it up, turn it down commands to the ELF. And those commands get influenced by a copy of that signal that goes into this threshold attack release ratio circuitry. And what comes out of that circuitry goes to the voltage controlled amplifier and says, turn it up, turn it down, turn it up, turn it down. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so now, Pro C2 gives you clean, clear, non-saturated control of your signal, and it has a few extra controls just as we saw. Now, here's a little bit of an advanced thing. We know what the attack and release behavior is when the signal crosses the threshold and goes below the threshold. But how does the signal react when it's above threshold? Do those attack and release times still influence the shape of the compression? Who says yes, who says no? Give me a Y or an N. Jose says no. Marco says yes. I'm glad we all agree. Fred says yes. Darren says yes. Any more no's? Everyone jumped on the yes bandwagon. Okay, here's the answer. You're both right. It's all relative. Thank you, Kyle. Another one of our senior ninjas doing big things. We're proud of him. So it's both. It's both. This took me a while to figure out, because I was like, okay, the attack is the reaction time. That's cool. You know, if it's below the threshold, the attack does nothing. If it's above the threshold, it acts. The release lets go. You know, once the signal is dropped below the threshold, the release lets go. But how does the compressor personality, how does the ELF pull up and down when the signal is above the threshold? What's the answer? What's the answer in Pro C2 talk? Styles. You see that style thing right in the center? It says style and it says clean right now. Now, this in Pro C2 is really 7 compressors in one. 7 different ELF personalities for the behavior when the signal is above the threshold. When it's below the threshold, the ELF isn't doing anything. Fine. How long the ELF takes to react, we know this. But what about when the signal is dancing way above the threshold? How do we know how it's deciding to pull it up or down or let it go or hold it there? That is the behavior or personality. The ELF, but it's multiple personalities, or multiple elves, just like the what's the Disney thing? The Seven Dwarves. It's the Seven Dwarves. It is seven, actually. I love it. It's the Seven Dwarves of percussion in Pro C2. And they're different ones. There's clean, there's classic, there's opto, there's punchy, and all of them have different personalities. Some they allow more attack and they release more quickly. Some jump on the attack and release more slowly. Some change depending on how much gain reduction you're doing, like opto. So you have to get to know your elves, your seven dwarves in Pro C2. Yes, it is totally possible, Marco. Watch this live training over 7 times, and then you'll have 4% of questions left, and we'll answer those next time. Absolutely. You have to play with compression. So let's just watch for a second and listen, and then we'll leave a couple minutes for questions. And here, that red line going down, on this one, that's our gain reduction. That is showing us the finger of the little elf. Not giving you the finger, but showing you the finger. And that's where the soft bypass is on the plugin. On all plugins, there's a hard bypass and a soft bypass. You always want to find the soft bypass if it exists, because then it doesn't hiccup when you go in and out. So that's where the soft bypass is located. And you can see this is what I'm talking about with auto gain, right? As we compress down with auto gain on, you feel the power you're creating. It doesn't get weaker on you. And that is nice because you get to hear what you're doing, and that's that little yellow auto gain on. Now here's another Pro C2 only feature. The little headphone icon can solo the portion of the signal that's being compressed. So you can hear both frequency-wise and transient-wise what you're actually applying the compression to, which is very, very helpful for training your ears on how to set compression. So you see me now slowing down the attack, and you can see also the gain reduction history, right? We see the gain reduction meter going up and down, but we also see the history of the gain reduction moving across our screen, and now we can start to see what we call the shape that we're creating on the compression. also, Pro C2 has look ahead. And look ahead uses the buffer of the DAW to get in front of the transient, right? You can't do this in analog very easily. But in digital, you can use that buffer that you set in your preferences, your audio preferences. And when we're mixing and mastering, we want a long buffer, right? And that gives the compressor a sneaky chance to get in front of a kick or a conga slap and start to pull it down even before it happens. Now we know with too fast of attack, you can kill the energy. So it's not always a good thing to use look ahead. But sometimes if you really want to control some spiky distortion creating peaks, some look ahead can be good. And now I'm just going to skip ahead here to let's get to know a few of the elves for a minute, and then we're gonna a little bit run out of time, but I will answer some questions. So let's now meet some of the dwarves. So those are two different elves right there, pumping and punchy. And if you hear the pumping, that elf releases really quick above the threshold, right? Above the threshold. So you can make all different kinds of energy and create energy with the elf that you choose, and this will dictate the personality above the threshold. And that's an aggressive elf right there, right? Vocal. All right. Well, these we've really had a good look at musical compression with saturation and fewer controls, technical compression with no saturation and lots of controls. Some of the controls are common, and yet on Pro C2 we get some extra controls. And then the real key of getting your money's worth on Pro C2 is getting to know the different styles and playing with them. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not. But when you go under the hood there, you can start to create some very cool energy shapes of your sounds, and this is where really the power comes from. Okay. We ended it right at 3:00. I know people need to go, and that is totally cool. Thank everyone for coming. I'm going to stay for a few minutes and answer any questions that people might have. But thank you everyone for coming. If you have questions and you have time to stay, I'll happily answer them. The next webinar, free webinar, will be a bootcamp of EQ. We'll email you, and we're not going to announce it. It's going to be private, or we'll announce it publicly right before we do it. So now I will turn over to questions. Anyone needs anything from us, mixmasterwyatt.com. Go to our website, hit us on the live chat. We're almost always there, one of us or the other of us. Really, mostly it's almost always Mike. And we have all kinds of classes, right? Classes with teachers, classes without teachers. We have a Friday 4 to 5 VIP membership meeting where we do shootouts of plugins and hang out on a Friday and talk about mixing and mastering. And I show stuff I'm passionate about. So come chill at the school. Hit us on the live chat. Lots of good stuff for you. Okay. Thank you. All right. Questions. Let's see. Let's go to some questions. Could one use, from Jose, could one use Pro C2 clean and then use the same setting on FG401 and get a better sound of harmonics? Yeah, I wouldn't say the same settings. I would say similar, right? All of these compressors are touchy-feely. They really are, which is why you can't use a preset. You have to do it by hand. But that's the thing. Once these elves start to behave and behave the way you expect them to, it's fun. You want to do it by hand. You wake up in the morning and you want to compress stuff. You can use similar settings. Semi-fast attack, 4-to-1 ratio, pretty slow release, 3 dB of threshold. And yes, you would get a similar shape with harmonics. Ed, you have to type on webinars. It just gets too crazy with the talking. Sorry. But if you can type, that would be good. Okay, Jose, that made sense. Good. Other question. Walter, attack time is easily heard, but release time can get tricky. What's a good tip for hearing the release time when compressing vocals? Okay, so the release time levels out the sustain of sounds, right? We saw that. And if you watch this again, you'll see it. So with a vocal, it depends if it's that person is rapping or that person is singing. If they're singing and they're singing long notes, and part of the delicate part of the performance is that the vocal drops off or dies away, it can be kind of weird. A long release can kind of actually hold the sustain up too long and can sort of fight a beautiful decay, right? So it's all very program dependent, which is why you really do have to learn how to set your compression by ear. Now, this being said, because I saw you ask the question a few times, there is something on Pro C2, and we'll go to Pro C2 here, called auto release. It's not on vintage compressors, but here in auto release, the auto release algorithm tracks the release, the hysteresis, or the speed of the decay of the signal, and it releases according to the hysteresis. And so it's nice on a vocal, for example, that changes a lot, like a very melodic kind of singing, because it tracks it. So because one release setting might not fit all, right? It might not really work. So whenever auto release is possible, especially on a human performance of anything where the signal's changing a lot, auto release can be your friend. So just remember, slow releases, more compressed, faster releases, less compressed, more bouncy, and auto release might be your friend, right? Because I love auto release and I love auto gain. They are my friends. And if they're there, I tend to use them almost always. Good. Did that make sense? Okay, awesome, Walter. Okay. Ed says, Logic looks hella tricky and I found it hard to understand most of the things you were doing. Well, I wasn't using too much Logic, Ed. I was really just using the plugins. I don't even think I touched Logic. So Logic can be a little tricky. The fact is that Logic is, once you get to know it, it works very, very well. It sounds really good. I think Logic is not a good name for Logic because things are hidden in weird places. Once you know where they are, you're cool. But it's not the most user-friendly, and I would agree with that. It's a little bit of unlogic. The reason that we use Logic, I use it, is because it interfaces well with the other technology that we use to teach in the school. but you know, it has a little bit of a learning curve. And then once you get to use it, it becomes your friend. In mixing and mastering, we respect Logic because it sounds good. Okay. Richard Scott says, thank you for this. Is there any way you could break down sidechaining with a simple analogy again? Yes, I can. Richard Scott, this analogy is for you. It's like dancing the tango, sidechaining, right? Tango dancing. One person lunges forward, and right at that moment, the other person lunges back. And they work together, right? One person sticks their leg forward, and the other person sticks their leg back right at the same time. That's what sidechaining is, right? And so, for example, with a kick in the bass in a production, we always want, when the kick is king or queen, whatever, the kick is supreme. Everything must move out of the way to the kick, right? The kick keeps people dancing. It's tribal. So when the kick kicks, we want the bass to tango step back just for the moment that the kick kicks forward and then come back after the kick is kicked. And this way they're dancing the tango. One steps forward, one steps back. And it creates a little bit of a bounce. It creates some low frequency management so the low frequencies don't get overloaded, and it creates a groove. Can you picture that, Richard? The kick and the bass dancing the tango. The kick steps forward, the bass steps back. I have a million of these. Okay, good. Other questions? What is my favorite musical compressor and why? You know, you want me to play favorites. I can tell you my favorite 10, but I couldn't tell you my favorite one. An LA2A is a wonderful thing because it has a very fat tube sound and it's very simple. It has one knob. That's all there is. There's no attack. There's no release. There's no ratio. There's just an input sort of gain, which drives the threshold. 1176 is also vintage, and it has an intensity to it. It has a kind of a tough distortion at times that makes things absolutely cut through in the mix, and you can absolutely crush things with 1176 and they still sound alive, but they don't move. I love a distressor, you know. I love distressor. I love a fatso. Those are great Empirical Labs products that I respect and I love. I love the Slate FG401. I think it's fantastic. I think they did a great job on that. A Manley Verimu is a very good, great sounding musical compressor. Lots of saturation, really good sound. Man, who am I forgetting, Paul? Who else do we like? Mike. Those are some of my, but I love a lot of them. I really do. And I use a lot of them and I try them out playfully. Like, hey, how does this work on this? How does this work on that? And it's fun. That's part of the fun of our job, is that it's still performed by humans and not by robots, right? So there you go. Okay, thank you, Marco. Thank you. I really appreciate it. That's great. Thank you, guys. It's so much fun to get together all over the world and do this live. And then you also get to watch it later. And sometimes watching it later helps things sink in. But we are having so much fun at the school right now. It's just ridiculous. And it's all because of passionate, dedicated people like you who show up and contribute and ask good questions. And we keep it fresh, you know. I'm so glad that thank you. I just have so much fun doing this and meeting new people all over the world and having people meet each other all over the world and building a community, you know. Learning doesn't have to be this lonely place. You know, music production doesn't have to be a lonely, solitary, frustrating experience. It does not. And I think we've sort of cracked the code on how to do this live. And it's working. So I really appreciate it.